Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us here today. My name is Richard van der Meulen. I'm the Managing Director of Solution Consulting GT Nexus, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Infor. And with me, I've got Ian here, Ian Lauer, Solution Architect of Infor, more focused on the planning side, where I'm more on the Commerce Cloud side, which will make a lot more sense as we progress through this presentation. I guess you're all in the right room. It's a little bit difficult maybe, as the original documentation said, to be determined. So I guess you found it. So that's already our first task completed. You're probably wondering, right? Why are we staring at a baby, right? It's cute for sure. Yes, it is cute, but that's not the reason. And he's a little bit upset, and that's kind of partial part of the story, but the really thing that we're focusing on here is what he's actually wearing. He's wearing a nappy. And it is almost to the day 22 years ago that a certain gentleman called Hao Li published a study on nappies, or as the Americans like to call it, diapers. Does anybody know that study? And does anybody know what the phenomenon was called that he coined or phrased out of that? We're all planning people, right? So don't be shy. What was it? No? Okay. So maybe this will help a little bit. It'll help maybe a lot because it actually has the word in it underneath it. But it's the bullwhip effect. It's all about how consumption of goods are static. And think about nappies, and I've got 10-month-old twins, and I can tell you their consumption of nappies is very, very, very regular. Yet for some reason, if you'd go upstream, if you'd go to the supplier or even just to the manufacturer, you see huge amounts of fluctuation in the demands for production and for suppliers of their raw materials. How is that possible? Right? How can it be possible that there's such a fluctuation on that side, yet the consumption, as we all know, is very static? Now, as a consumer myself, I kind of, I'm partly to blame for that because I don't buy one nappy at a time, right? I buy them in boxes. And I tell you what, my retailer has these promotions, and I actually know that they have promotions, so I wait until the next promotion is on, and I buy lots and lots of packs of these things. So I'm batch buying, and I'm doing that based on promotions. Now, it's not just between the retailer and the end consumer. That is happening throughout the supply chain. There's lots of distorting reasons why this bullwhip effect is being created. Other reasons are, for example, production lead times or transportation lead times and their variability in their supply. And another main reason that came out of this study was the fact that every one of these parties in the supply chain thinks of themselves within silos. So when they are planning, they're planning for what they know, and what they know is within their four walls. Now, within Infor, we're about to embark on a different approach on this. Yes, the planning is still extremely important, and that needs to work well. And Ian is going to talk about this in a minute. But using the information that is outside of the four walls of your organization to feed into the planning tool, to extend and break down those silos and those barriers between these parties, that is what we believe is going to make a breakthrough in the way that we're going to plan. Why are we going to do that? Well, I think Hao Li kind of said it quite nicely himself. Distorted information from one end of the supply chain to the other can lead to tremendous inefficiencies. Excess inventory. Just like me, I buy lots of nappies in one go and then pile them up in the baby room until the next promotion, and then I'll buy more. I'm building inventory. Now, that means that other people in that chain also are building inventory to deal with that variability in that demand. Poor customer service. Yeah, I'm pretty annoyed if there's no nappies on the shelf when I actually really, really need them. Lost revenue. Clearly, if there's no products on the shelf, I'm going to lose revenue. And you can push this thing all the way through up in the supply chain. Misguided capacity plans. If we don't know what the capacity of our suppliers is because they're not communicating with us, it's going to be very difficult to figure out what you can and cannot plan for. Inefficient transportation. Well, we all love to have full container loads, full truckloads of goods, but if we don't know what is required at any given moment in time, transportation is going to be less than optimal. And of course, missed production schedules with all these components put together. Now, Ian, maybe you can talk a little bit more about what are kind of the root causes around these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess if we would just start to look at some of the causes of these challenges, and I think a lot of you in the organisation, in the room, how many of you are running SNOP processes today or integrated business planning processes? Everyone's running it to some extent. And 22 years ago, if I'd have asked that same question, you might have even asked the question of, well, what's an SNOP process? It was kind of coined during that period. And the effects that Richard's just described was really because of things such as we're not talking to our customers. So if your customer's a retailer, are they providing you with the information to allow you to best plan your supply chain? You're just not got that end-to-end visibility. So actually you're starting to make decisions that are not informed in terms of that visibility. Probably everything is internally focused unless you're starting to expand out to your customers, for example. So we're looking at our production capabilities, we're looking at our warehouse capacities, we're potentially just setting inventories based upon what we potentially predict our demand to be, potentially predict what our suppliers are going to be doing. So these are things that we're starting to really look at over the last 20 years in terms of what we call sales and operations planning and integrated business planning. And I think things such as fixed lead times, in terms of you're buffering with inventory, we've already talked about this sort of thing, but also one key element of sales and operations planning and integrated business planning is that it really does, very few organizations are actually talking to extended partners of their supply chain, so not talking to their suppliers, not potentially talking to their customers within this process. How many of you are extending outside of so I guess the internal focus, how many of you are extending outside of that internal focus within your SNOP process? Are there any of you that are doing that with, so everybody raised their hands of running an SNOP process, but I think everybody's got that internal focus. So you're not getting the best picture of your demand, you're potentially not understanding your third-party supply chain in terms of who those suppliers are, what their capacities are, what their capabilities are to deliver for you. You're probably all using something to run your integrated business planning process, SNOP process. So we didn't really just explain who Infor are. Infor are actually the third largest software vendor, application software vendor in the world behind SAP and Oracle. So I know there are a number of SAP houses within the room here. So we, like any of those other vendors, have a best-in-class SNOP solution. And why do you implement an SNOP solution? It's really to cover the ability to better demand plan, better supply plan, to take kind of this feature wall at the bottom in terms of being able to potentially put in promotions, to run workflows, to receive alerts when things are significantly off track. And I know one of the key themes of this is also the ability to run different scenarios. So at any point in time, what happens if Richard goes in and buys this many nappies instead of this many nappies? What's the impact to you as an organisation? Or what if 10 Richards go and do that? Or everybody within the Netherlands goes and does that? What happens if then we haven't got the inventory in place? How quickly can we react from a manufacturing element? Now, organisations want to quickly be able to run scenarios. How many of you are running scenarios as part of your SNOP process effectively? So again, a limited number, but I think you should all be able to, in some extent, being able to run different scenarios. Why do we run scenarios? Why do you run a scenario within your SNOP process?
To determine what direction we go in the sense of building some kind of buffers or reacting later if we are not sure for an opportunity to get it. Has impact on our capacity.
Yeah, and that's kind of the theme. Is really it's always because of some sort of level of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't even know if our manufacturing estate's going to be exactly the same out into the future. But in a traditional integrated business planning process, and you've probably all seen the Gartner models, the Oliver White type models. There's a fairly typical repeatable process that you can run scenarios around. So it might be the product launch. So there's a product review phase of an SNOP. So new products are typically one of the hardest things to predict. They're also one of the hardest things to make because they have a huge impact on potentially existing production capacity, starts to reduce capacity. Why do we run scenarios? Because we might want to ask these sorts of questions. And probably a lot of you do that today. You do what-ifs, whether it's in a SNOP system or within Excel, but you're probably doing something that says, what if a product is delayed to market? Will we still hit our targets? Do we have to push something else out? You can probably look at our excess inventory and try and promote that in a different way. But that type of scenario is very much internally focused because it's all around, we've delayed something, what's the effect on our business, what else can we do? On the demand side of things, you might receive some sort of abnormal demand. And again, part of your demand review process will allow you to ask the question on, what does that mean to us? Is it going to continue? Is it going to cannibalize some of our products? Is it going to cannibalize somebody else's products? And you need to consider that in any scenarios going forward. And again, most people can consider different scenarios internally. I'm starting to see a lot more people get closer to customers, particularly in the NAPI world, because they are receiving potentially customer forecasts already. They might not be talking about those customer forecasts, so they don't know how much trust is within there, but we're starting to already make inroads on the customer collaboration side of things in terms of being able to get alternative scenarios of demand. Our customer may do this. Our customer may be launching new stores. We've probably got a promotional calendar with them going out 12 months, potentially. So we're bringing that type of thing into the process. Likewise, on production, the supply review element of the SNOP process. Why do we want to do this? Exactly what we had in the corner there. So what happens if we're hitting capacity? Are there alternative options of production using an alternative line, a third-party supplier? But again, internally focused. It's within the four walls of your supply chain. One of the things I'm still yet to see, and this is the opportunity that Richard's going to talk a little bit about, is outside of the upstream of the supply chain. So I don't know a single organization today who's running as part of their SNOP process something that starts to look at the extended lead time of your raw material deliveries, your suppliers, potentially their capacities. And so obviously the longer the lead time that you've got, the further your suppliers are away. There's, again, in the same way as with our customer collaboration, there's volatility of demand because of the things like the promotions. There's a lot of volatility in the supply piece. And how do we cope with that today? We buffer it with lead time. We buffer it with our own internal inventory. The supplier is probably doing the same of buffering it with their inventory. And ultimately, there's just a lot of buffer in terms of stock throughout the process. And all we're doing is not linking the two things together, our extended supply chain into our SNOP process. So today, any supply review would be internal. You'd be putting in what if our lead time was extended by 20%. What happens if we move to an alternate supplier? We're still not getting that future visibility of information directly from the supplier like we do with the customer forecast to allow us to better improve our SNOP process. So we typically find you end up with a picture that doesn't show very well on the projector in terms of running your SNOP process at a top level, potentially sending information down to your execution systems, sending information to your supplier. So you've made all of these great SNOP plans, potentially alternative scenarios, sending that information in batch down to whichever systems and third parties that you're dealing with. I've got the arrow going back both ways. Sometimes getting information back into that process. If you do, it's probably very rarely, or it's in batch, it's infrequent. And it's very much, I think probably these two things on the right-hand side, very much enterprise-centric. It's all around your enterprise, sending information out to your suppliers and potentially receiving things back. And all of the scenarios that you've planned for as part of your integrated business planning process are effectively just only on your single piece of information, the single scenarios you've run, pushed on it, data out to your suppliers, and you're not receiving that information back and using it to better plan your business. So I'm going to pass back to Richard, who's just going to talk a little bit now of what we talk about our networked inventory IBP process. So taking that integrated business planning process that your single enterprise is running and how Infor are now starting to see the future vision and hooking that into the wider network.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, so as we talked about earlier, and Ian just pointed out, enterprise-centric. We look at within the four walls, but you know, this picture might be a fair reflection of your supply chain, right? There's lots of parties involved, right? There's the consumer on the right-hand side, there's wholesalers, manufacturers, suppliers, tier 2 suppliers, etc., etc. And each and every one of them are doing the same thing as you are doing. Now, if you position yourself in any of these places in the supply chain, 80% of the data that you use to do your planning, up to 80%, sits outside of your four walls. So using that and harnessing that information in an effective fashion is going to improve your ability to do that planning more effectively. Now, what is the state of the market today of being able to capture that information? Typically, it looks something like this. There's parties, multiple parties, simplified here in 4 different parties, and each of them are communicating with each other. Either we're sending each other emails, we're phoning each other, lots and lots of spreadsheets. But it's all point-to-point exchanging of information, maybe even an EDI connection in there, but it's always point-to-point. Now, what's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with this picture is that each and every one of these parties are seeing themselves as the center of the universe. And that doesn't work. If we're all trying to work with the same information, you can't put yourself in the center of the universe. You've got to do exactly the opposite. You need to invert the information model. You need to put the information in the center and have all the parties around it collaborating on that information. Now, this model is what GT Nexus Commerce Cloud provides. It's a single entity platform where information only exists once and parties collaborate on that. And that is your suppliers, your carriers, your 3PLs, your tier 2 suppliers, even your banks, your financial providers. And that ensures that you have a single version of truth. And that is absolutely essential if you want to have the truth in your planning process. Now, we're not the inventors per se of this inverted information model. Maybe we've coined that phrase, I'm not really sure. But you're actually doing this every day. Most of us at least do this every day already. We're using applications that do this every day. For example, Facebook or LinkedIn, they do exactly the same thing. What do you do when you go onto Facebook? You're not sending anything to anybody, are you? No. You're actually posting stuff. It's in the name, right? Have you posted anything on Facebook? That's what GT Nexus, that's what live on GT Nexus is like as well. You don't send anything to anybody. You post things. Somebody posts an order. Now that order for the supplier is his sales order, whereas the purchase order for somebody else. It is a forecast of what needs to happen for a logistics provider because he knows how much he needs to move, etc. Applying this mechanism, this inverted information model, this posting model to supply chain can have huge effect. And you will end up with something that looks very similar to this. This is a single day out of the GT Nexus platform. This is the 30th of May, 2016. So, and on this day, we shipped, or customers on the platform shipped more than 35,000 shipments. And they are supplying forecasts to their suppliers, to their tier 2 suppliers. They're putting orders on the system. They're collaborating on those orders. There are suppliers who are generating pack lists off the back of it, scanning operations, and making sure that they then get packed and shipped to the ultimate end location. There's invoices that are being generated on the system by the suppliers that are automatically matched and ultimately paid through financial transactions, again, on the system, including the financial transactions. And ultimately, the visibility of the physical movement of these goods are tracked and traced on the system as well. And what does that do? That provides us as the buying party all the visibility that we need from the moment that we've placed an order or the moment that we've even placed a forecast all the way down until we receive the goods. So we collaborate on forecasts and we get estimated time of arrival information of orders and shipments throughout the life cycle until it hits our system. And all that information can be fed directly into your planning tool. And we do this, we've been around for a while, right? GT Nexus has been around for about 17 years now. And companies like Adidas, Nike, ExxonMobil, they're all using the platform in various different ways. And this is really the reason why Infor bought GT Nexus. It is to be able to have this Commerce Cloud capability, and ultimately to be able to create what we've now coined the kind of the next generation control tower system, which has the networked connection. So it has all those objects and information that we talked about earlier, the orders, the shipments, the inventory, the visibility of where this stuff is at any given moment in time. It has the multi-enterprise angle to that of the suppliers, the customers, etc. It has what Ian already talked about, the closed-loop planning and execution capability. And one thing that we haven't talked about just yet, but is kind of the next evolution within this, is the ability to apply machine learning to all this information. Because now you're sitting on a world of information that not just represents the information in your four walls, but also the stuff outside of it. And with machine learning, we can apply all sorts of exciting capabilities to identify trends and to improve their supply chain even further. Think, for example, on inbound shipments, figuring out how long is it going to take for something to get from A to B. Now, you can do this based on your information of when things might arrive and what happened last week or the month before, or you could apply machine learning across the whole platform so that you don't only know based on your information when things will arrive, but of everybody who's operating on that platform. Now, that ETA is going to be a hell of a lot more accurate than the ETA that you might be able to create just on your own data. So that's just an example of where machine learning will have an effect within this scenario as well. I think I want to, Ian, if you want to take the kind of key takeaways.
Yeah, I think the other element to this is so best practice integrated business planning. So who's running a best practice? What's best practice? So there's a lot of consultancies out there that effectively define a best practice process, but whether it's just a reasonably mature integrated business planning process, you're going to have a good picture of demand. You're going to have a good picture of supply. I've implemented these processes. I implemented it myself at part of one of the ICI divisions, and we know that it adds value into the business. We're by better predicting your demand and managing your production facilities, you're absolutely receiving value on your investments in tools and process in this particular place. But what we're now doing, so as Richard's just described around that network, is being able to extend that out. And actually, I think we focused a little bit too much on we're receiving lots of information about an order at a particular point in time. This is also not just the order or the next order. It's starting to share those long-term forecasts of purchases, of production to your manufacturers, to your suppliers, and maybe your suppliers' if you're potentially constrained by a commodity that's rarer up the supply chain, and starting to get feedback loop immediately, not just on when's my next orders, actually what's our capability to supply those pieces. So I've implemented these pieces very much so with only the left-hand side in place. Richard's implemented a lot of these on the right-hand side where we've got this network and we're providing this data. What do you do with it? So really the key takeaway that we're saying is that from an Infor aspect, we've effectively bringing these two things together to pull together a network-based integrated business planning process, which ultimately deliver financial value and, of course, now a happy baby. So we'd like to thank you for your attention here and any questions that you'd like to.